Hello, friends, and welcome back to Sunshine Strategies Radio, where local news meets practical hope. I'm your host, Jen McMillan, founder of Sunshine Strategies, civic advocate, and neighborhood right here in Central Illinois. This podcast was designed to keep you informed, grounded, and connected to the place we call home. Because strong communities don't happen by accident, they're cultivated by informed neighbors who care. Now, this week's episode has been kind of a hard one for me to talk about. Many of you know that several years ago, I started this podcast as kids' political radio. Not because I had some grand strategy, not because I thought I was launching a brand, but because I was trying to explain the news to my then 9-year-old. And while we don't record those conversations anymore, we still have them around the dinner table, in the car. Just quick explainers for Charlie and Lizzo when something big hits the headlines. So when the Epstein files resurfaced in the national conversation, I found myself asking the same question again. What do I tell my kids and what do I tell you guys that isn't just another depressing reminder that power can be abused? Because yes, power was abused horrifically. And yes, systems failed terrifically. And yes, it will take decades to unpack every thread connected to Jeffrey Epstein and the network that enabled him. But if that's all we say, if that's all we offer our kids is the world is corrupt, then we've failed too. So this week, I've spent a little time coming up with a few lessons that I think that we can teach to our kids right now. The first is that power doesn't equal character. In America, especially lately, we tend to equate success with virtue, wealth with wisdom, fame with leadership. The Epstein case is a brutal reminder that those things are not the same. Character isn't measured by how many people know your name. It's measured by how you treat people who have less power than you do. And that's a lesson that applies both in middle school hallways as well as Manhattan penthouses. The second lesson is that institutions can fail. And that's why civic engagement is so important. Yes, our institutions failed here. And to be honest, they are still failing. But here's the deeper truth. Institutions are not mystical creatures. They're systems built and run by human beings. Laws matter, prosecutors matter, journalists matter, and above all else, voters matter. Democracy is less like a monument and more like a washing machine. If you don't maintain it, things are going to start to stink. So that doesn't mean give up. It means participate. If anything, this story should make us and our kids more engaged citizens, not just cynical spectators. The third lesson is to believe victims with compassion and critical thinking. Many victims in this case were dismissed for years before being taken seriously. We can teach two truths at the same time. Lead with compassion and think critically. Believing victims doesn't mean abandoning evidence. It means taking people seriously when they say they've been harmed. Dismissiveness protects abusers. Listening protects communities. The fourth lesson is a bit uncomfortable, but a real necessary one. That your body is yours. At its core, the Epstein story isn't about exploitation, but also secrecy, pressure, and shame. Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirators could not have done what they did without those tools altogether. So we have to teach our kids, your body is yours. You have the right to say no. Secrets about safety are not loyalty. They're red flags. If something feels wrong, tell someone safe. And I hope that my kids always feel that my husband and I are safe spaces for them to come to. These conversations are super awkward. Have them anyway. It is that important. Awkward is temporary. Silence can be permanent. And finally, moral courage, it isn't always loud. Some of the most important breakthroughs in this case came from people who refused to let it go. Investigative reporters, persistent attorneys, and victims who kept speaking. Moral courage rarely looks glamorous. Sometimes it looks like stubborn integrity. Sometimes it looks like staying steady when powerful people want you to be quiet. That's the kind of courage we want to model. So, the biggest part of this takeaway, this message today, is that this story isn't over. The systems that allow these crimes and cover ups are still operating. Money and influence are still distorting truth. That's real. But here's the part that I want my kids to understand: history has always had darkness. The question is not whether or not it exists. The question is whether we raise children who know how to confront it without becoming it. That means teaching discernment, teaching empathy, teaching civic responsibility, boundaries, as well as courage. And if we do all of that, if we use even the ugliest headlines as opportunities to build stronger humans, then we are not powerless. We are parenting on purpose. And that might be the most radical act of all. All right. Well, now that you got your 5 lessons from me today on Jeffrey Epstein, let's get back to some weekly news, a roundup of the news here in Central Illinois. So, the first thing I wanted to cover was President Trump's State of the Union address. And I just wanted to do some overview on the big themes. A lot of people missed this speech with good reason. I watched a majority of it. I can't say that I liked it. Um, but let's talk about it. His major themes of the State of the Union: a continued focus on border enforcement and immigration policy, expanding domestic energy production, strengthening American manufacturing, reducing federal regulations, and emphasizing America First economic policies. The president highlighted job growth in certain sectors, energy independence, and plans for additional tariffs aimed at trying to protect U.S. industries. He also doubled down on immigration enforcement measures, including expanded detention capacity and stricter border control strategies. So, whether you agreed with the tone or not, his speech signals this: federal policy is likely to continue to emphasize enforcement, energy, and domestic industry. For Central Illinois families, especially those connected to agriculture, logistics, and manufacturing, all of those policy directions matter. Because what happens in Washington eventually ripples into counties like Logan, Macon, and McLean. One of those issues that has trickled all the way down is um, that of data centers. And I wanted to highlight the one in Logan County specifically this week. So, if you're not familiar, a data center is basically a giant warehouse full of computers. These computers store information for things like social media, streaming, banking, AI, and cloud storage. When you upload a photo or a video like this recording, it goes to a data center somewhere. And companies are building more of them fast. But why are they looking at Logan County? Well, rural areas like Logan County often have large, affordable land parcels, access to major power infrastructure, fewer zoning barriers, and a proximity to fiber optic lines. Illinois, especially central and rural counties, we're increasingly attractive for these projects. So here's where it gets interesting. Data centers may bring some construction jobs temporarily. They increase the local tax base and can boost property values. But they also use enormous amounts of electricity, consume significant water for cooling, and employ relatively few long term workers once they're built. So the real question for Logan County is, do the long term benefits outweigh the long term costs? The local officials there are going to have to consider the strain on the power grid, as well as the environmental impact of this data center, the tax incentives being offered, and how it's going to affect the farmland around it. This is really just modern economic development happening in real time. It's not just about attracting something new, it's about asking whether or not it fits the long term vision of the community it's in. So that's a civic conversation worth paying attention to. If you live in Logan County and want to join that conversation, their next meeting of the Zoning and Economic Development Committee is on March 2nd at 6:30 p.m. And you can always hop on their website and learn more about their regular board meeting as well. And, I had to highlight something really special this week for our community spotlight. This is FFA week, and you might remember that I am a former FFA student myself. So, have you seen any of those kids wearing those blue jackets? Those are FFA jackets. Originally Future Farmers of America, you might remember them as. They've evolved way beyond traditional farming. Today, it includes agribusiness, environmental science, veterinary medicine, food systems, and leadership development. Now, me, myself, and I participated in the prepared speech as well as parliamentary procedure, if you could tell I was a language nerd. But in rural counties like the one I grew up in, FFA creates this pipeline of young people who understand not only land stewardship, but supply chains, leadership, and agricultural innovation. FFA is civic education disguised as agriculture education. Students learn how to run meetings using parliamentary procedure. They go to board meetings and practice leadership skills. They engage in community improvement projects. That's not nostalgia, that's infrastructure for the next generation. So, if you have noticed any of those blue jackets this week, you are looking at a future business owner, a county board member, an agronomist, or even an entrepreneur. Another thing worth celebrating. So, as we start to wrap up this week, I want to remind you that you can have one small action a week to really make a difference in your community. And I'm going to circle back to something that we talked about in the president's State of the Union address. It is that immigration enforcement policy is changing at the federal level frequently. And there are discussions nationwide about expanding detention capacity and enforcement infrastructure. So this week, whether you support stricter enforcement or have concerns about how policies are implemented, the important thing is this: stay informed about what decisions are being made locally. So you may have heard that these detention facilities are being brought up in these rural communities in a lot of red areas. I've not heard of any in Illinois so far. If that is wrong, let me know. But make sure you're going to those zoning meetings like the one we talked about in Logan County, or at least paying attention to what they're talking about, because they'll need the local government support if they're going to build any of these detention facilities in your community. Civic engagement doesn't require outrage, but it does require awareness and vigilance. And our strong communities are built when people understand what's happening. So, this week's through line, a lot of infrastructure. whether digital, agricultural, or civic. From data centers to FFA chapters to federal policy shifts, our counties sit at the intersection of national decisions and local consequences. And that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode. This is Sunshine Strategies Radio, and we hope that you stay curious, engaged, and grounded. I'll see you next week.